Welcome, everyone. I'm going to take a look at an email. I want to share with you the response I gave to this so that we can have a good understanding of how you can cite a work that you don't agree with and you even think it's hellish, but there are some things that it's validly recording that were that can help you prove what was in the original New Testament that has been removed afterwards. And this is an example of that. And somebody's saying it's impermissible for me to do that. If I think the epistle's from hell, that means I can't cite any of it to prove what the New Testament used to have in it. So we're going to take a look at that. It's an important example from Hebrews chapter 5, verse 5, and we'll get into that in a minute. So are we not allowed, this is the topic today, are we not allowed to cite Hebrews 5:5 to prove how the New Testament once read, because we say Hebrews is an epistle from hell? And Laverne is the person. He's a friend of this channel. He likes what we say on some things, but he's free to disagree on many things, and so that's okay. But I want to share with you why I did this. So this is a question that arose in his mind. How can I cite Hebrews 5:5 to prove something in the New Testament when I say in my series, I have a series entitled Hebrews, an Epistle from Hell, episodes 1 through 6. And just for the curiosity of those who are watching this video, is we have this series. This is our URL that lists all the episodes involving in the category of Hebrews, an Epistle from Hell. And you'll see, for example, number 2, one of our points is there's a second creator in the corrupt Septuagint of Psalm 102 that is then quoted in this epistle from hell. And that's one of the key proofs of why it is an epistle from hell. And we'll get into that in the episode here, where I'm now going to quote or read the letter I wrote to Laverne in response. Hi, Laverne, is response number 1. So I have other topics I address in his comment. So this is on the topic of what is the topic of this video. Response number 1, you raised several topics, so this will address only one issue. You say I cannot cite Hebrews 5:5 to corroborate that Matthew and Luke at one time both said at Jesus' baptism, "This day I have begotten thee," God's voice speaking from heaven. You contend that because I said the book of Hebrews is an epistle from hell itself, my actual words, it stops me from relying upon it to corroborate how Matthew and Luke once read. Since Hebrews 5:5 is not the only source of how the New Testament once read, I use Hebrews solely for corroboration of how the New Testament once read, and not to establish a point not well established outside of Hebrews. And we have many videos on This Day I've Begotten Thee. It was in the italic versions and the Codex Bezae. That's from 400 AD. It's in everything prior to the Vulgate of 405 AD. Everything. And then Jerome makes it go away. And then the manuscripts that are manufactured after that time all conform to the Latin Vulgate. So the Latin Vulgate has a power, even though it's in a different language, to cause the text, the Greek, to now eliminate it, and it's now gone. It's gone. It's not in the King James. It's in no English Bible anymore, and yet it was both in Matthew and in Luke clearly, and also was quoted in a dialogue debate between Augustine and Bishop Festus, where Bishop Festus is saying you cannot be a believer in the Nicene Creed, where it says there's an eternal Son of God, and believe in the book of Matthew or Luke, because those two books both say that God said from heaven, "This day I begotten thee," at his baptism. And therefore, Jesus was not an eternal Son of God. He became an eternal Son of God in the baptism, in the original Greek text that still existed as of 382 AD. That's how late the corruption has to happen after that time. And we know exactly when it happened. It happened with the Vulgate, 405 AD. So I cited Hebrews 5:5, which actually has the same wording, "This day begotten thee," and it's referring to God speaking over Jesus. So it was clearly a reference back to the baptism of Jesus. So anyway, and now I'm going to explain to him why I think I have a right to do it, and that is, I say this. Moreover, Hebrews' hellish teachings are not supported by the Hebrews 5:5 passage, unless there is no reason to think Hebrews 5:5 is a fabrication. In fact, Hebrews 5:5 runs against what are the hellish statements in Hebrews. So you're going to see the eternal Son doctrine is actually inside of Hebrews. And so why is he citing a passage that even Augustine believed and acknowledged the argument of Bishop Faustus that you can't believe in the Nicene Creed that Jesus was begotten, not made, and basically one with the Father from eternity, an eternal Son of God. You can't believe that, and at the same time believe Jesus had this baptism this day begotten. That's what Bishop Foster said. And yet you can see the passage I'm going to show Laverne all proved Jesus is this begotten, an eternal being, eternal Son of God, So let's take a look at this in a very strange way, and turns him into God of humanity and earth and all creation except himself. So anyway, but the first doctrine that is hellish from here are the major hellish passages. I'm writing Laverne. Number one, the hellish doctrine that God Yahweh is dead. Not surprisingly, the author of Hebrews has a verse just as strong as Romans 7:1-7 that indicates that Yahweh God, who spoke to this subcreator Son as God, is himself now dead. So, if you look up Protestant works, you'll actually see if you type into Google "God is dead" or "God died at the cross," you'll see how many churches, how many sermons say God died at the cross. And the only one who resurrects is Jesus. And this is what Paul says, that the husband of the people of Israel died at the cross. Now now Jews, you're free to marry another. And that means that God Yahweh is dead. And this passage in Romans 7 and this one in Hebrews supports the argument of the Gnostics that God Yahweh died and he's in Sheol. And in a Gnostic view of death, you're not dead. You are in the land of the dead, which that's just what we also call sometimes hell, but they are calling it the land of the dead. So this was the Gnostic teaching, and using these principles from Romans 7 and Hebrews here. So that's why I call it an epistle from hell. This is one of the reasons, one of the multiple reasons. But here's where it gets really evil in the epistle to the Hebrews. For the epistle writer in Hebrews says that this God Yahweh was the testator who created the New Testament, as in the legal term last will and testament. So if you know, our own law to this day has the same law of Rome at that time, where if you have a testament, you would say, when I die, all my property goes to this person. It's not the same as a will. And now what he says is the only way that the benefits of the testament can be received by the intended recipients is the testator must die. So since God made this testament to us, for us to get this New Testament, we have to have the death of God. Okay, so that's what he's saying. And it in fact says this. Then this is a quote of the passage. Then Hebrews says the testator, quote, must by necessity remain dead for the New Testament to live. Otherwise, the New Testament has, quote, no strength while the testator lives. This is Hebrews 9, verses 15-17. This is an epistle from hell. Romans 7 was relied upon by Gnostics to prove God, the demiurge, died, leaving Jesus to rule and reign in heaven. No commentary in Hebrews 9:16 ever explains that, quote, death of the testator meant which must remain true for ourselves to enjoy the New Testament. Even a verse-by-verse commentary finds a means to sidestep the issue. So nobody wants to say what I'm telling you. That I don't measure whether a thing belongs in the Bible because the commentators have even spoken about it. Nobody will tell you what it means. The testator must be remain dead. Okay, so I give you an example. Verse by verse commentary, Laverne, you go take a look at it. What's the one thing he avoids answering at all? Who is the testator that's dead? Says nothing about it. Number two, the hellish doctrine that God's law is abolished. The epistle writer to Hebrews sets forth this clearly apostate, meaning under Deuteronomy 13:1-10, anyone who would abrogate God's law is an apostate. And so he does that. Epistle writer does that in these passages, and we'll read them. Verse 18, the former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless. For the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. Hebrews 7, verses 18-19, NIV. Verse 7, for if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. Hebrews 8:7, NIV. And then next, verse 13 here. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. Hebrews 8:13. And then I mentioned to Laverne this. Incidentally, it is astonishing that the epistle writer could read the promise of a new covenant in Jeremiah was to abrogate the Torah. The passage of Jeremiah 31 says that what is new is that God's Torah will now be written on our hearts, and not that it would be done away with. I mean, it's an insane reading or insane ignorance of the passage that talks about a new covenant. And a lot of Christians, by the way, write me and they say, well, we're going to have a New Testament, which means we wouldn't have that gets rid of the law. No, read it. Read Jeremiah 31. The promise of a new covenant is that the law, the Torah of God, my Torah, will be put on their hearts. Not that it would be taken away. It's the exact opposite of what the new covenant means. It means I'm going to bring it in a deeper, more personal way to each person. And he's going to do that through Jesus Christ. That's why Jesus says, those not one jot or tittle of this law will go away until heaven and earth passes away. So there is just simply no concept of the epistle writer that it has any understanding what Jeremiah 31:31 is. It totally just thinks the word new is all he has to focus on. So I hate to say it. There's a word for it. I'm just going to say a lack of intelligence, a lack of understanding of God's word. Let's keep going. Number 3, another pagan idea of immortals in Hebrews. And this is very serious because this shows you he's a pagan. He's not even a Christian. The writer of Hebrews is extremely pagan in chapter 7 when he talks about Melchizedek. All right, so it says here, the writers of Hebrews is extremely pagan in chapter 7 when he talks about Melchizedek, who is a mere brief character in the Bible, the king of Salem and the priest of El Elyon, God Most High, according to Genesis 14:18-20. It says nothing else. And wait till you see what the Hebrew writers turns this around. Just simply mentioning a person's name, just from that alone, he's gonna make an unbelievable claim. The absence of Genesis mentioning of any facts about his life led the Hebrews writer to ascribe to this king that he himself is immortal, having no father, no beginning of days, and no genealogy. Here's the verse, Hebrews 7, verses 1-3. I'm just quoting verse 3. Hebrews 7, verse 3. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without the beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Wow. The epistle writer does not say Jesus is this immortal, but instead implies Jesus may be another priest like Melchizedek who appears, Hebrews 7, verse 15. So what appears to be what the Hebrews writer is saying is Jesus is an immortal, meaning he's an eternal son of God. That's what the Nicene Creed basically is construed to mean. And he's and Melchizedek was an eternal being too, and he's immortal. So here you have God Yahweh, and now you have Melchizedek, another immortal, meaning as old as God, meaning there is no age, no father, son, a unbegotten being. And then Jesus is a priest like Melchizedek, who's immortal, meaning he has no beginning. He's not really, he's eternal. So you've got now 3 gods. I mean, any being that's immortal like this has to be deemed God. Where did he come from? And the fact that Jesus has miraculous powers would suggest that he is God from beginning, but a separate God from the Father. I mean, literally, not even a Godhead anymore. We're just talking about immortal beings separate and apart. So this is completely like paganism. There's no doubt about it. This is paganism. The pit of hell itself is what you're reading here. The pit of hell. And that's why Christians should never absorb this thing. This should just never be on your list to read any part of it. It's just, even if it has any good part, don't read it. It's just full of pagan ideas. The epistle writer made Melchizedek thus into an immortal with no father like God and no beginning of days, which are attributes only God could have. Is he God the Father? No. The writer affirms he was a priest to the God Most High, and it was a fact conjured from the silence of his parentage in a passage. Now, this is another thing I just want to comment to other people is, why do we accept people who just talk and don't say, Yahweh told me this? God said you cannot accept a prophet. There's only one exception, the prophet. I'll explain in a minute. But you're not allowed to accept anybody who comes to you and says, hey, don't do this, do that. God told, but they don't say, God told me. I'm quoting God. If they will not quote God, they cannot be a prophet. Therefore, they cannot even be a false prophet. So the one reason why the epistle writer of Hebrews never claims he has any prophetic message, he never says, I've heard this from God, I was in the 7th heaven, 3rd heaven, wherever, whichever heaven. He doesn't ascribe any miraculous source to his teaching here. This is simply somebody who's a pagan who's trying to teach you that Jesus is God immortal from time immemorial, because he is that pagan. And that's what's the problem here, is we are listening to a person who doesn't quote God, and therefore he's free to contradict God, free to make up pagan new gods, immortals, Melchizedek, Jesus, and Yahweh. They're all 3 immortal beings. This is what you get, my friends. Christians have no concept of what they're looking at. And we're never told to use a little critical thinking. And that's why we make these mistakes, and we accept something as corrupt as this and don't even judge it. Don't test it against the word of God. This is so evil. This epistle is from the pit of hell. I can't even get it out of my mind how evil it is. He, like God, was never created and had no beginning. This concept of an immortal alongside the Father is completely pagan and is a belief in multiple gods, eternal, self-existent beings. It's like as if we're looking at Mount Olympus is what we're doing. That's how evil this is. I'm sorry, I'm just getting carried away. I do not see any overlap or support to supposed immortals from Hebrews 5:5. And so, in other words, this is my using Hebrews 5:5 doesn't support any of the arguments of this day begotten. It doesn't support the argument that Jesus was an eternal being. Okay, he said he's like Melchizedek. So here you might even argue, if he's going along with Hebrews 5:5, that Jesus actually was begotten in time as a son. And so maybe he's holding two contradictory ideas in his mind, because this is what the idea of this day begotten was used by Bishop Faustus in 382 in a debate with Augustine. You can't believe in the eternal Son doctrine from the Nicene Creed and believe in that Matthew and Luke at that time read this day begotten at the baptism of Jesus, because that means Jesus was begotten at his baptism, not in eternity past. And that was the whole point of Bishop Faustus. And that's why Augustine's buddy, Jerome, 30 years later, corrupts the New Testament in Latin and takes out both Matthew and Luke's this day begotten lines, unfortunately. But anyway, so I don't see any problem with thinking that Hebrews 5:5 was added to help bolster these pagan arguments of multiple gods, that Jesus was a God from eternity. In fact, it kind of runs against it, because it would imply Jesus was begotten at some point in time, and that would mean Jesus isn't God. Begotten beings cannot be God. Sorry to tell people that, but if Jesus is the first begotten Son, as Paul says, and if you believed in Paul, you have to believe Jesus is not God, because that's what Paul says in Colossians 1:15 and to 17. Jesus is a begotten being. But I digress. Anyway, number 4. The greatest sin in the Bible is to have another God in front of God. I'm writing Laverne now. I'm back to the text here of this letter. Exodus 20, verses 1 to 5. To that end, Hebrews uses a mistranslation in the Greek Septuagint translation of 247 BC, produced by a pagan-run empire in Egypt, to assert Hebrews 1, verses 2, 8 to 10, that the Son is God also. And I do not see that Hebrews 5:5, this day begotten, is supported by this evil passage. And it reads, God has in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds. Hebrews 1, verse 2, King James Version. Now we're going to find out what he means by the Son made the worlds. Did the Son make all the worlds, including all humans, or did the Father have any role in that, or did the Father only make the Son? Guess which one it's going to be. Here's the verse, the key passage to know from Hebrews, verses 8 to 10 of chapter 1. Because in this passage, it will call Jesus God. That's particularly in verse 8, the very first verse. Verse 8, but about the Son, he, Yahweh, in context, says, your throne, O God, who's God? The Son, will last forever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. I'm going to pause there and let you know that he's quoting a passage from the Septuagint Greek corruption of a text in the book of Psalms, as we'll see. So we can prove that he's made a mistake. It's not just simply he's getting inspiration. He's thinking he's citing a book that is reliable, that translated the Bible from a Greek pagan emperor named Ptolemy. And obviously, the pagan readers and translators didn't mind corrupting the text to make it pagan, that you could have multiple gods. But I digress. Let's keep going. Verse 9, continuing to quote the Septuagint Psalm, as we'll get to in a minute. Thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore God, even thy God, has anointed thee. So God has anointed, or made a Messiah out of this person. Anointed is Messiah, or form of that in a verb. And so this fits with Jesus, right? So if God is addressed, the Son is God, and now is anointed. God is now anointing him. That is fitting the point of this passage. All right, so let's continue with verse 10. And thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thine hands. Now, see, the word Lord is ambiguous in Greek. It could mean Jesus. So Jesus could be the one who laid the foundations of the earth if we're going to now learn this person is also the creator. We already quoted you where he claims above that Jesus was used. Where is that? Yes, in verse 2, he said, the Son was appointed heir of all things, by whom also he, God Yahweh, made the worlds. So the Son was used to make the worlds. And here he's now referring to someone as Lord in the same context where the Son is called God. And he's claiming this Lord, is it God Yahweh or is it the Son, laid the foundations of the earth, and heavens are the works of thine hands. Well, let's keep reading. Okay, so the passage says in this Septuagint Greek mistranslation, I want to emphasize mistranslation, he, God, answered him, the suppliant, the one praying to him, tell me, that is God speaking to the suppliant, thou Lord. So God is in the Septuagint is calling the suppliant, the one praying to him, Lord. See? So this is a big, huge error because it's not this way in Hebrew in the Dead Sea Scrolls or in the Masoretic text. So now this is what is going to be corrupted by the epistle writer of the Hebrews, that is going to turn Jesus into God. Thou Lord. Okay, so this is how it stops, and we just stop there for a minute, and then we're going to see how it then reads. Septuagint Greek translation was an error. The Hebrew original, confirmed by the Dead Sea Scrolls, reads instead, he, God, weakened me, the suppliant, and says, oh my God. So the suppliant says, oh my God. So the person being addressed as God or Lord is God, and who's praying is David. It's a prayer. The Septuagint of Psalm 102, relied upon by the epistle to the Hebrews, has God addressing the suppliant as Lord again here in Psalm 102, verse 25. And this is where we get the idea that the Lord, remember we had up here, thou Lord in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth. Apparently he's saying, giving this attribution to Jesus the Son when you go back to verse 2, and he's claiming Jesus was the Son, was by whom God made the worlds. And here you have the Son being God, and then you have the word Lord laying the foundations of the earth. So it all fits together. Here's where the corruption came from. The Psalm 102, verse 25 in the Septuagint. It says in this corrupt mistranslation in Greek in 247 BC, it says that thou Lord, talking to the suppliant, the person who's praying, thou Lord, at the beginning you founded the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Do you see what happened? By making a transition mistake in Greek and making the person speaking is now the person being addressed by God is the Lord, is the how you can turn it into a crazy idea that the Son or the suppliant is the one who is the God of the universe, the one praying to God, the universe, in the original Hebrew. So that's all it is it's David addressing God as the creator of the heavens and earth. And instead in the Septuagint is now the God is addressing this suppliant, the one praying to him, as God of the universe, as God who created the heavens and earth. Do you see the problem? Now, scholars have gone through this and exposed this. And by the way, all of the corruptions in this with the Greek Septuagint used to be there in our Bibles, and they've been removed as we've realized the Septuagint was corrupt. So you won't find this in any Bible but the Dewey Rhymes, which basically mimics anything that is in the Latin Vulgate. So only the Catholics keep it the way it looks. It looks horrible if you know the real text. Anyway, let's read what B.W. Bacon says. He pointed out a critical flaw in the Septuagint translation of this passage upon which the epistle writer of the Hebrews relied. Quote, the word Lord is wholly absent from the Hebrew text of Psalm 102, verse 25. So there was no addressing of the suppliant as God, Lord, or whatever. And this is in B.W. Bacon, Hebrews 1, verses 10 to 12, and the Septuagint rendering of Psalm 102, verse 23, in a German Theological Treatise of 1902, Volume 3 at 280-85. You can get it online if you go to books.google.com and you can search those words. Bacon also identified other errors in the Septuagint translation that made it appear God is talking in verses 23 to 24 when it is the suppliant, the person praying to God, instead who truly is talking. And here's again Bacon. With the Septuagint, he answered him. The whole passage down to the end of the psalm becomes the answer of Yahweh to the suppliant, who accordingly appears to be addressed as Curio and creator of heaven and earth. So he's telling you how the Septuagint corrupt, evil translation reads, turning the person praying to him into God who created the heavens and earth. Bacon says in the original Hebrew, however, it is simply a complaint of the psalmist at the shortness of his days, which are cut off in the midst. The original Hebrew that the Masoretes preserved is confirmed by the Dead Sea Scrolls from 125 BC, which does cover Psalm 102, the Masoretic number, and has the key verses of 23 to 25. The Dead Sea Scroll reads, "He weakened my strength along the course. He shortened my days. I said, God," who's talking? The suppliant. What did the Septuagint do? It made God said to the suppliant, I said, God, do not take me away in the middle of my days. Your years are throughout all generations. Of old, you laid the foundations of the earth. So who's the you here? Is that God? Yes. In the Septuagint corrupt translation, the pagan-minded thinking, it was God talking to the suppliant, this person, and called him God, Yahweh, God who created the heavens and earth. And so the Son is what the Hebrew Bible put in there to make you think it's Jesus. So that's his one little extra corruption. But assuming he could, but you can't even go there, because there is nobody but God Yahweh who is the creator of heaven and earth in the original, and this is the original, and we can see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. No matter what people claim, it's was never what it reads in the book of Hebrew, the epistle to the Hebrews. So anyway, let's read it to the end. Of old, you Yahweh laid the foundations of the earth. The heavens are the worth of your hands, not some son, not some eternal son. No, no, no. That is evil. That is fraud. That is a epistle from the pit of hell. The Septuagint translation is the worst possible translation. If you go through all the verses, we've studied numerous verses that have corrupted the Bible towards pagan ideology and theory, and it's just obvious it was not any kind of Hebrew translators. And even the Hebrew scholars of today say, how could these people have translated the Hebrew into these words? Those who know both languages. Nehemiah Gordon is an example of that. He says it's a very wooden, almost like you're looking at a dictionary trying to find out what the words are. You don't have any facility of language. And so anyway, and you can find the Psalm 102 at, let's see here. So let's take a look at the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. This is a Bible that was recovered out of the desert sands that dates approximately from 125 BC or older. And Psalm 102 was found in manuscript 4Q 84. You see that up here, Psalms, they call it. And you can find this in an excellent free website called dssenglishbible.com. It's broken down by chapter and verse, and you can see it. And here you have it. You can see the subject. He, Yahweh, weaken my strength along the course. So this is a human being here. He shortened my days, a human being, meaning a person who has a finite lifetime. And then it has, I said, my God, don't take away from me in the middle of my days. Your years are throughout all generations. Of old, you laid the foundations of heaven and earth. Who's the creator? Not the Son, as the Hebrew writers interpolated the word son in this earlier part here. So totally an epistle from hell. Totally expunge it from anything you read. That's my recommendation. And again, I don't see any way this particular passage in the book of Hebrews is supported or even consistent with Hebrews 5:5, because if it says this day begotten thee, that means this son is not an eternal or immortal being, as seems to be suggested or implied in the book of Hebrews separately. So we actually have a verse that runs counter to what he's saying, and that's Hebrews 5:5. But even so, even assuming it was supportive of it, we independently know that this day begotten thee was in the Bible, in Matthew and Luke all along, because we had numerous other sources. So I don't rely completely on this, Laverne. So, but I think, given that it doesn't, Hebrews 5:5 does not support any of these evil doctrines from hell, as I call them, since it doesn't have any bearing to help them, in fact, appears to be contrary to them, Laverne, I think it's okay to cite Hebrews 5:5 to just prove how the Bible read. So obviously the Hebrews writer just took for granted everybody understood. It says in Matthew and Luke, this day begotten after Jesus' baptism. All right, I hope that helps everybody else who's peering in and just wants to find out why I cite things sometimes from books I don't agree with. Oh, by the way, you can even cite things from Paul. If Paul says that James is the brother of Jesus, hey, that's evidence that James is the brother of Jesus, because it doesn't actually have any bearing on Paul's doctrines. He's just mentioning an incidental fact. Just to give you another example of what this point is that you can have uninspired writings that can be useful to understand historical events or how manuscripts used to read. Okay, God bless. Take care, everybody. Ciao. Bye.